Hello, everyone, and the warmest of welcomes to the 2020 shortlist announcement for the National Biography Award. My name is John Vallance. I'm the New South Wales State Librarian, and I am speaking to you safely, physically distanced from a corner of the Donald and Mick Fanway Hall room in the State Library of New South Wales on Macquarie Street. I hope you won't think I'm pushing the boat out too far at the beginning if I say that nearly all of us tend to understand the world through the prism of what others have said or thought or done. And there are lots of ways in which we assemble and preserve that knowledge of what other people have said and thought and done. One of them is, of course, writing about it, and that's what tonight is about at the end. But another is through the medium of understanding the country that we live on. And in that spirit, I start this evening by acknowledging that I'm sitting tonight on Gadigal land, and I pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. And wherever you're sitting, I hope you'll take a moment to make that same reflection. And I might add a quick plug here. As you probably know, we've just celebrated the 250th anniversary of or marked the 250th anniversary of the arrival of Captain Cook in Botany Bay. And next Monday at the State Library of New South Wales, we are opening physically a really wonderful exhibition called 8 Days in Camay, which again, through this medium of country, tells the story of the experience of the people who were on shore when Cook and his colleagues sailed into Botany Bay or Camay. The exhibition is currently on the State Library's website in digital form, but as part of our reopening to the world, as we hope this pandemic crisis is starting to move on, I very much hope that you'll be able, if you're in Sydney, to come and see the exhibition physically. So on to the National Biography Award. It was founded in 1996 by Geoffrey Keynes, who was very keen to encourage the very highest standards of biographical writing in Australia. It was taken up quickly by the late Michael Crouch, one of the library's great modern benefactors. And for some years, he supported it as well. And when Michael died a few years ago, we were delighted that Sam Mears and the Nelson Mears Foundation was able to take up the baton of supporting this very important award. So my warmest thanks on behalf of the whole of the library community and Australia's literary community to Geoffrey Keynes, to Michael Crouch, to Sam Mears and the Nelson Mears Foundation for their imaginative support of biographical writing in Australia. Works that are entered for the award must present an Australian subject or be about an Australian subject has made a significant contribution. It is a truly national award. There's a total of $42,000 in prize money. Every shortlisted author receives an award of $2,000. The overall winner receives $25,000. And in honor of Michael Crouch, Sam Mears very generously endowed an award in his name, the Michael Crouch Award, which goes to a debut work of biography. We'll be announcing the winners of the award at another ceremony at the end of August, and I'll say something about that at the end. This year we had 89 entries for the National Biography Award, and they were judged, they were expertly evaluated, they read all of these entries by Margie Byrne, by Mark McKenna, by Richard White and Ian McCalman, all very strong friends of the State Library of New South Wales and friends of writing generally in Australia. Huge job they've undertaken, and again, I thank them most warmly for all the work that they've done to make this award as worthwhile as it is. Now, before I read out the list of shortlisted authors, we've got a real treat for you in store. We're going to have a conversation between Robert Tickner and Caroline Baum. Now, I've been told that I can't introduce Robert Tickner, much as I'd like to. He is, as I'm sure you know, one of Australia's most admired and respected political leaders. He's retired now from all of that. He's also the author of a memoir that was published earlier this year called 10 Doors Down. Caroline Baum, you probably know as well. She's just appeared on the screen and she's put her hands on her chin in a very a thoughtful way. She is also the author of a very well-received memoir called Only, which was published in 2017. And I think just as significantly for us here at the library, she was our inaugural reader in residence a few years ago. There's a lot of talk about writing and writers' residencies and writing prizes. I think that we don't pay enough attention to readers. Without readers, you don't really have writers. There's no point really in writing if no one else is going to read what you write. And we were really keen to encourage reading as much as writing. And Caro spent a year with us exploring the library's collection, talking about it, talking about what she discovered, running a whole host of literary events. And a good part of the modern renaissance of the State Library and the State Library's engagement with Australia's literary community is thanks to the work that Caroline Baum has done as an advocate for our work. So I'm really delighted to introduce Caroline, who is physically distant down on the south coast. We've taken no risks tonight, and she is going to have a conversation with Robert Tickner, who is also physically distant, but he's not quite so far away. He's sitting a few doors down from me now in the library, in the Sir William Dixon Research Library. So over to you, Caro. Thank you so much for joining us.
And thank you, John. Warm words, which thank you. Thank you for those very kind and warm words. They remind me of how much I miss you. I miss the library, and I look forward to being in it again soon. So without further ado, let me introduce Robert Tickner, since that's really a pleasure for me. And I'm coming to you, by the way, I should say, John mentioned that I'm on the South Coast. I am, of course, on Dharawal country. Robert Tickner grew up as a country boy on the New South Wales North Coast and became an Aboriginal legal service lawyer and an alderman of Sydney City Council. In 1984, he won the federal seat of Hughes, and in 1990, he became the Federal Minister for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Affairs. He is, in fact, Australia's longest serving minister in that role in a period of great reform during the Hawke and Keating governments. He later became CEO of the Australian Red Cross and led the organisation for a decade from 2005 to 2015. But his memoir, which John mentioned, is called 10 Doors Down, is really not about that. It's a tender, moving account of his experience of being adopted and making contact with his birth mother. It's really a book about family, about nature and nurture. And I'm really thrilled to be able to talk to Robert around his book this evening in relation to this award for biography and memoir. So greetings to you, Robert.
Hi, Carolyn, and good evening to everyone. It's terrific to be here.
I want to start by asking you, since John was talking earlier there about the importance of reading and that you can't really be a writer unless you're a reader. Are you a reader generally of biography as well as a writer of memoir? Is biography one of your favourite genres?
Yes, and it has been since I was very young. I always have to, hang my head in shame to confess that I've never had the passion for fiction that I have for biography. Just the way it's always been.
But I'm interested in the fact that you are a reader of biography and you have been a politician, because I think it's fair to say, Robert, that political memoirs are generally pretty self-serving. Have you read a political memoir that you haven't thought of in that way?
Well, to be honest, I guess I'm much more interested in a political memoir that really is more focused on policy, less on internecine battles within political parties, game point scoring, and things that really, frankly, I don't think impress the Australian people all that much, and I share that.
Mm.
Look, funny thing you should mention this, because I've just been reflecting a lot on political memoir. I wrote an earlier book called Taking a Stand, which is one that doesn't reveal, as my former colleague Neil Blewett has said in print, doesn't reveal a lot about me as a person, but it's a book that I think was worth reading as well, because it's worth writing, because it's really a book about history, and that history is told in great detail. My book, 10 Doors Down, is very, very different. It's a book which talks about this extraordinary adoption reunion.
That's right. And that does make it, I think, an exception to most political memoirs. I do remember that when I was chatting to you a couple of weeks ago, you were talking about reading a biography of Don Dunstan.
Yes, I did read a recent biography by Angela Woolacott, and I thought it was a terrific reminder of the extraordinary person that Don Dunstan was. But the book that's really been moving me of late is a book by a former prisoner who served 4 decades in the United States Penitentiary in Louisiana. It's a book called Solitary by a fellow called Albert Woodfox. And it really is such an indictment of the United States justice system as it's been. And what is interesting, of course, is that Woodfox is a campaigner for justice reform following his release from prison. And indeed, in America, we're actually seeing the Democrats and the Republicans starting to work together, believe it or not, on issues of justice reform. We need to do more of that cross-party work in Australia on justice reform.
We do. But it's nice to hear that something good is coming out of the United States at the moment, because not much else is. Now, let's just turn a little bit for a moment to the practice of writing generally, both in terms of biography and in terms of memoir, because I think that as a biographer, you always hope for a secret or a revelation to manifest itself during the course of your research. You always dream about a cache of letters that no one has seen for, hundreds of years. And in a way, I think that the best memoirs do have to contain an element of surprise, an element of revelation. And I was just wondering how you went about this, because you're very upfront. I mean, right from the get-go in your book, you tell us that this is going to be a story about you meeting your birth mother. So how did you structure the book to give us the kind of emotional payoff? Because I have to say, you really do.
Thank you. It's lovely of you to say that. Well, there's kind of 2 questions there about the structure of the book, but also that cachet of letters, or the find of a letter, actually happened. And maybe if I tell that part of the story first, essentially when my mother had passed away in 2012, I continued to look after my stepdad, but eventually the house was to be sold. And the very, very last minute that I spent in that house, managed to find this one letter, which was actually hidden away on a top shelf. Had never seen it before, but it was a personal handwritten letter by my late birth mother telling her story about the adoption reunion. And it was just such an extraordinary revelation that she had committed those moving thoughts to writing. And I thought, this has got to be the conclusion, to give her the last word in the book. So that's exactly what I did. But in answer to your question about structure, I put a lot of thought into this, because it's a book that I needed to tell a little bit about my growing up in my adopted family, because that's a huge part of shaping my life. And indeed, I always believed that nurture was almost the central driving determinant of shaping me as an individual. And then my son was born in late 1992. And I looked down on this small child, and it was the one human being on the planet that I knew I was biologically related to. And to be very frank, something snapped. And I realized that I had to start searching for my birth mother. I eventually found her, had a very long period of time with her, almost 20 years, and was then able to meet my birth father and 2 wonderful brothers and sisters, 18 months after I met my mother. So this book sets out my personal history as an adopted person, my move into politics, and then, you know, with the busiest and high point of my political involvement during the so-called Mabo debate in 1992 and 1993. That's the exact time that I met my birth mother. But I also, in the book, try and do something that other writers who've written about their their reunion, their adoption reunion, haven't done. And that's to put some of the public policy issues concerning adoption in the book. Because, you know, I find that so many people, you know, just don't realize that so recently there was this policy in Australia where literally hundreds of thousands of children were ultimately adopted, and the impact was on that, certainly that number of people through the adoption process, and the grief that was caused to so often, and in particular to the relinquishing mothers, literally shaped and in so many cases damned their whole lives to a very significant extent. That's the story of my mother. She was a strong woman, a proud woman, but so damaged by the adoption.
I'm so pleased that you mentioned that, because one of the things that I think makes the book so exceptional and memorable and so rewarding is, first of all, that you had a happy childhood with the parents who adopted you. You never felt a lack, you never felt an absence, you were loved, you really were loved. So that's a really beautiful start to the story. But when you mention the services involved, I think that this book really fleshes that out and sort of gives us all the peripheral players in the story, the social workers, all the other agencies that are involved. And I love the fact that you acknowledge their role, and the fact that there was no one blocking you or denying you or, you know, refusing you. I think, you know, that's also a very sort of heartening part of the story. Do you think, Robert, that one of the bonuses of memoir like this is that we're seeing, if you like, an end to shame and secrecy and stigma around adoption and parentage, that as these stories come to light, as policy becomes more considered and more compassionate, the stigma is falling away?
Look, that's undoubtedly true, Carolyn. And of course, this is an example of a reform here in New South Wales and indeed around Australia that really happened with a large measure of cross-party cooperation. And that happened because values were changing, and the kind of stigma that you talked about had fallen away to a very significant extent. But I really do make this critical point, and that is that my story is exceptional. I'm so privileged that I had this dream run to meet my birth mother, my birth father, two brothers and sisters, and this whole wide circle of relations and cousins. The sad fact is that the statistics are tough, and they show that very few people are able to achieve what I managed to achieve. So I'm privileged, I'm lucky. It's very important to remember that so many women carry that stigma to their grave from all those years ago. And a relative tiny percentage of people go on to meet their full extended family as I have. And that many adopted people who seek to meet their birth mother don't get to do that. Or if they do get to do it, it doesn't always last. And I guess it's important to say my story is that it's unique to me. But one thing I learnt, and I feel it with every bone in my body, is that terrible grief that women went through, and the suffering that really lasted all their lives. So I say to a lot of people who were adopted, you know, you need to understand that, you know, you weren't rejected. Your mother was the subject to the most unreasonable and relentless and stigmatizing pressure to give up a child. And I quote in the book some of the doctors who wrote in the medical journals of Australia, describing relinquishing mothers as essentially intellectually, mentally deficient, unworthy. This is literally in the Medical Journal of Australia. So the women of today, and hopefully, men and women and all of us live in a much better world. Public policy has shifted very significantly, but, I can tell you right now, there are many, many, many thousands of people in Australia who are still impacted by those adoption policies that continued, right on 50s, 60s, 70s, and beyond. It's a legacy not to be proud of.
Just running on from that, it must, however, that's a very poignant statement that you've made there. It must gladden your heart somewhat as a former Minister for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Affairs. It must gladden your heart to see this extraordinary flourishing of Indigenous writing that we're witnessing at the moment, and particularly and including memoir. I'm thinking of, really significant landmark books like Growing Up Aboriginal in Australia, edited by Dr. Anita Heiss, which, there's been a huge demand for that book. Again, a resurgence of interest in that book in the light of Black Lives Matter. And then, of course, landmark biographies like Alexis Wright's remarkable, multifaceted biography, Tracker. And I'm just wondering, when you see this flourishing of stories, Indigenous stories in this space, biography and memoir, do you think that the telling of stories can help shape change and drive policy?
Of course I do. Of course I do. It's one of the most powerful tools of change, we've ever invented. And the writing that you've spoken of, it makes major contributions to that change. I think that, we're only just seeing the initial flourishing of what's going to pass. And, you just only have to look on your television screen and see the incredibly inspirational young Aboriginal men and women who are starting to make their mark on modern writing, on public policy, on social commentary. They're very powerful, very beautiful Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voices, which will help shape this country so much for the better in the years to come.
Well, look, John, I think that, that is, Robert, that is such an inspiring note on which to end. I don't think that we can add to that. It's just too much of a high point. I'm going to thank you very much again for talking with us this evening, but also for your memoir, 10 Doors Down. I love the fact that part of it takes place just up the road from where I am in Stanwell Park. I marvel constantly throughout the book at how you manage to juggle flights and communications, and I'm trying to imagine all of that in a world where you didn't have a mobile phone. So even the logistics of how you connect at various points with crucial people that you need to meet in order to get to your birth mother, and of course the incredibly emotional encounter with her on the steps of the Opera House. It's just a fantastic read, and thank you for your generosity this evening. And now I would like to throw back to John for the important announcement of the evening.
Thank you, Carolyn. Thanks so much.
And thank you, Carolyn. Thank you, Robert, again from me, for a conversation so strong and so compelling that it even worked on Zoom. I'm sitting in another room watching that, as you would have been watching that. Well, just thank you. Thank you again so much. Before I read out the names of the shortlisted authors, again, I would like to thank Sam Mears and the Nelson Mears Foundation, without whose support we wouldn't be here in the first place this evening. And again, the judges, Margie Byrne, Mark McKenna, Richard White, and Ian McCalman for judging the 89 entries we had this year. And the shortlist for the 2020 National Biography Award is made up of the following works. First, Beyond Words, A Year with Kenneth Cook by Jacqueline Kent, published by University of Queensland Press. Hearing Maud by Jessica White, University of Western Australia Press. Idling in Green Places, A Life of Alec Chisholm by Russell McGregor, published by the Australian Scholarly Publishing. The Girls by Chloe Higgins, published by Picador. Things Nobody Knows But Me by by Amra Pajalic, published by Transit Lounge, and Tiberius with a Telephone, The Life and Stories of William McMahon by Patrick Mullins, published by Scribe. And you will find out who has won this year on the 28th of August. Pandemic permitting, we're hoping that the 28th of August will be one of the first physical events that we have during our reopening at the State Library of New South Wales. So keep your fingers crossed, keep everything crossed. We're hoping that we'll be able to gather in person on the 28th of August and find out who has won this year's National Biography Award. At the same time, I'd like to extend our very best wishes to our friends in Victoria, and in particular the State Library of Victoria, who are going through a very difficult time at the moment. So every positive good wish to them, and let's hope that we all stay safe and out of harm's way so that we can meet again on the 28th of August. Thank you so much for joining us this evening, and thank you again to Caroline and Robert.